If you want to pass exams all the time, these are some of the things you can deploy. And I'm saying this as a person who has failed exams once. Not only once, no, twice. No, not only twice or more times. Until I got to a point where I decided that I'm never going to fail exams again. And I started studying certain techniques. And these are the techniques I've accumulated over the years. So number one, know your syllabus. Read the syllabus of what you're studying and the expected learning outcomes. Your syllabus is like your map. Your learning outcomes are like the destination. If you don't have those, then you may as well read anything around any subject. You might read physics, chemistry, mathematics, English, literature. But the exams are going to ask things around the learning outcomes that they want. So you might be brilliant at knowing certain concepts in physics, but maybe at your level, at the stage that you are, those are not the topics that are being asked. Not that they are not important, not that they are not part of physics, but maybe they are not in your syllabus. You might read them as a hobby. So you have to make sure that you know your syllabus and what is expected. What is the definition of terms? What terms are you supposed to know by the end of that? What is the significance of even studying that? And it's even better if you know the application. Number two, read up a book called The 3 Barriers to Study. It's by L. Ron Hubbard, right? The guys who wrote the book of Dianetics. And it's a very interesting read. When I read that book, it opened my eyes a lot. So there's something called The 3 Barriers to Study. You can get that free online. Now, just to brief you on it a bit, I don't want to deviate. Remember, we're still on point number 2. We're not yet on point number 3 because when I'm talking 3 barriers to study, I'm going to talk 3 things, but we're still on point number 2, right? So the 3 barriers to study, the first barrier to study is the absence of a mass. Absence of a mass. Absence of a mass. Say that with me. The absence of a mass means that the thing that you're studying about, you have got no experience with it. You've never seen it. So you're only studying that, whether in books or if they're showing you videos would be better actually to give you a better experience. But you're only learning that thing in theory. You haven't seen it. Images and videos might help, but at some point you might need to interact with that thing. In other words, you can learn all you need to learn about how to drive cars, but if you never actually get into a car, you are not going to be able to grasp the concepts. Because what may be written in text format in a book about how to drive cars may not be consistent with what actually happens in reality. And I guess that's why a lot of institutions, they take children for attachment to go to an actual workplace where they have to experience whatever they are learning, whether it's accounting, social work. So this is not a video that's just for people in sciences, though I may tend to give scientific examples, right? So that's absence of a mass, right? If you're learning about planes, be around airports, see the planes, get inside, see the whole team, see the cockpit, see the process and everything. And then you go back to the book, everything makes sense. The second barrier is too steep a gradient. Too steep a gradient, what they mean by too steep a gradient is when you're studying something, you might be having a hard time because you did not understand previous concepts. The more that you do not consolidate the previous concepts you didn't adjust to, you might have a hard time. Again, for example, in chemistry, when you start learning chemistry, you are taught the periodic table and to know all the elements, and maybe next you're taught what is a mole, certain definition of terms, and then maybe you're taught how to construct a chemical equation. And then maybe you're taught how to calculate those chemical equations, how to calculate the numbers in them, and so forth, right? And this might be in chapter 1 and chapter 2, or it might take the first 3 chapters of that. And it might sound boring, by the way, because you're waiting to get into the meat, you're waiting to work with the beakers and But the thing is, if you don't understand those fundamental principles that you're taught first, you're going to have a hard time throughout your journey with chemistry, because you're going to have to construct chemical equations throughout. You're going to have to know how to calculate those numbers throughout. You're going to have to know what a mole is and which element is this throughout. And by not knowing that, you can't proceed to the next level, because even a topic that's on chapter 16 is going to require that. And the more that you didn't get the first 3 chapters, you're not going to grasp the 4th chapter. So you're going to fail at that. So you need to be able to go back to fundamental principles of any subject, and any chapter that you didn't understand, work hard on it. Don't be happy. I used to be happy when I was younger and say, oh, I'm glad we're done with indices, or I'm glad we're done with logarithms, or whatever. Then those logarithms or those indices or that circle geometry, it comes up in the next chapter, but in a different way. And then there's something called the misunderstood word. Again, the theory is that when there's a misunderstood word, a word that you don't understand, even if you take it for granted, it might be a word that you think you know, and you pass through a passage and you read that. That's where misunderstandings begin, because you didn't understand that word. What they've researched was that if you've ever read a book, and you are 3 pages in from a certain section and you don't even know what you're doing, like you have to keep reading, They say if you go back to that piece of literature and you find a word that you didn't particularly understand, and you find the definition of that word, it will solve everything. If you read again, you will know. Because you might, again, look at certain words, maybe because they're common or whatever, but you don't really know what they mean. What I realized with myself was, there's a lot of words I always hear on TV or teachers saying, or to a point where I think I know those words, but I don't know what those words mean. So if you're in medicine, if you're in a certain subject that has got its own jargon, technical graphics, whatever, get the dictionary for that, so that you know what that means in that subject. Right? So we're still on number 2. But let's proceed to number 3. Follow a schedule. I always talk about discipline. Discipline and success go together. If you don't follow a schedule, you're not going to be able to establish a study time. So you need to have a schedule for studying. Just like the schools, the school system is scheduled. I don't care how many times people criticize the school system, but it's efficient because it's got a schedule. It's not based on how you feel, on whether you like it or not. If it's time for a certain subject, it's time for a certain subject. This leads us to number 4. Study a day's work. If you learn something today, have some time whenever you're free. Again, you schedule this, because if you don't have a schedule for it, you're not going to find time for it. If you want to have time for it, you have to put it on a schedule. Study what you learned for that day. Recap on it. That improves your memory of it, because it tells your subconscious mind that, okay, you have to remember this. Number 5, have group discussions and ask each other questions. Have a support group. Know the other people that are doing that subject. What are their queries? Have debates, but not just to debate and fight. Constructive discussions with them. Number 6, learn the required answering techniques of the subject. And this is kind of linked even to knowing the learning outcomes, which you said in number 1. And find resources from people who have succeeded before to see how they were answering. And this is not to say they were perfect, but the ones who were successful in it, they're probably in the ballpark of what is being looked for. You can improve on that, or you can look at it and see what they're trying to do. And if you see many of them, or many instances of how they answer those questions, your subconscious mind can formulate what's required. Number 7, Write a lot of exam papers and find a tutor who can mark them for self-evaluation. Write a lot of exam papers. A lot of test papers. If you've got access to test papers, write them, and don't fool yourself, don't cheat yourself, don't mark yourself correct when you're wrong. If you have a tutor, create relationships with your tutors, create relationships with educators who can mark for you. If they need compensation because you're using their time, pay them. Do something for them. Offer to do something for them. If they're doing it voluntarily, that's fine. But even those that don't do it pro bono, respect them because it's their time. Time is money. Number 8, use the 80-20 rule on test papers. What are the topics that usually come up and which sections usually yield the most marks? Again, what you want to do with this 80-20 rule thing, 80-20 rule means that you focus on the few stuff that matters most. In some test papers, you might find out that 3 big questions might be the ones that hold most of the marks. Yet there might be 20 little questions that give you 1 mark. So you want to focus first, you want to write the answers to the questions that hold many marks, because you might spend too much time on questions that are not holding a lot of weight earlier on, only to rush through the areas that were supposed to give you a lot of marks. So if you want to pass exams all the time, you have to do that. And even with the topics, like I said, if you know the learning outcomes and everything and the syllabus, but even looking at the more you write more test papers, you know what tends to come up in these exams. Because at the end of the day, in any subject, physics, whatever, there's a lot to talk about. Not all of it is going to be in the test paper. But what do they frequently want to test you on? What are the learning outcomes that they prioritize? Because they only make a test paper based on what they think are the topics that are the most important for you to know. So you have to know what topics are those, and you can create it. They might not verbalize what are the most important topics, but you can make your own judgment by looking at the past 10 years of the papers that other people have set for that same subject, right? And finally, number 9, teach yourself time management, which I kind of think is a repeat or follow schedule, but teach yourself time management in terms of the studying, but also teach yourself time management in answering the questions. So it's a different point. Teach yourself time management in answering the questions. And that's all that I gotta say. If you like what we're doing on this channel, please subscribe, give it to someone who you know is studying for something. Thank you.